She leaned in, a glass of Pinot Grigio poised like a weapon between her fingers, and said it with that smirk she'd been perfecting since high school. "So, Eli, how's that little side hustle of yours?" It was a casual shot, delivered with the grace of a beauty queen and the weight of a brick to the face, and it landed dead center, right in front of the mashed potatoes. Around the long oak dining table, the kind our father spent half a year refinishing in the garage, silence briefly hovered like fog. Then came the laughter, tight, polite, dismissive, the kind of laugh that doesn't warm a room but freezes it in place. Rob, Michelle's perfectly groomed hedge fund husband, actually chuckled and muttered that he's selling crypto hoodies on Etsy, which earned him a nudge from Michelle and a knowing look from Dad. I could have said something then. I could have lit the whole table on fire with 3 words, but I didn't. Instead, I reached for the stuffing, scooped a polite portion, and took my seat, same chair I sat in as a teenager, the one Mom used to call Eli's spot, wedged awkwardly between the dining room wall and the kitchen doorway. They didn't call it the kids' table anymore, but somehow I was still seated right beside Jamie, my 24-year-old cousin fresh out of grad school, while Michelle and Rob were practically holding court at the head of the table like some suburban royalty. You'd think at 42, I'd have earned my seat by the fireplace with the rest of the grown-ups, but in my family, age didn't matter. Money did. Titles did. The number of LinkedIn endorsements did. And Michelle? Michelle was the queen of all of it, director of people operations at Target.com, an online retail behemoth with warehouses big enough to be their own zip codes. Dad still brought up her first promotion every Thanksgiving like it was a medal of honor. Growing up, Michelle got the spotlight, the new shoes, the late curfew, and the benefit of every single doubt. I got detention slips, a stack of second-hand books, and a seat at the dinner table where no one asked about my day. When I dropped out of business school to chase a startup dream, just me and my co-founder Wes in a leaky apartment with more whiteboards than furniture, Mom cried like I'd joined a cult, and Dad didn't talk to me for 3 weeks. Michelle called it a phase. She also told everyone at the last Thanksgiving that I was doing some freelancing or app stuff like I was teaching dogs to code for beer money. But here's the thing they never saw coming. While Michelle was climbing the corporate ladder in high heels, gripping her HR handbook like a Bible, I was failing. I failed for 6 straight years. Raised investment. Lost it. Built platforms that nobody used. Slept in my car for 4 months when a vendor sued us and froze the bank account. Ate stale ramen and stared at screens until I forgot what daylight looked like. I didn't just hustle. I bled for my company. And then one day it clicked. We cracked a logistics optimization system using a new data modeling technique Wes had been playing with. It took us from barely scraping 6 figures in annual revenue to being in acquisition talks with 2 of the biggest retailers in the country. I kept it quiet, not out of modesty, but because something in me wanted to wait. Not just for the deal, but for the moment. This moment. I glanced at my phone under the table. 3 new texts from Wes. One had the TechCrunch logo in the thumbnail. The subject line read, "We closed." The second one was a screenshot of our acquisition announcement, now live on Bloomberg. The third was simple. They don't know, do they? Don't say anything yet. Let it breathe. So I looked up, let Michelle keep talking about the company Christmas party she was planning and how she managed to get the CEO to approve real snow in the lobby. She was proud of that, like it was the kind of achievement you carve into your tombstone. Dad poured himself another finger of bourbon, leaned back, and gave me one of those long looks. "You still doing that delivery app thing?" he asked, scratching his chin like the question itself bored him. "That, driver tracker startup?" "It's a bit more than that now," I said calmly, cutting into the turkey. "I read something about DoorDash expanding again," Michelle said. "You guys worried they'll crush you?" I smiled. "Not really." Truth was, DoorDash was one of the reasons our valuation had gone up 30% in the last quarter. They tried to buy us twice. But I didn't say that. Not yet. Jamie nudged me quietly. "Dude, you okay?" "Yeah," I said. "Just enjoying the show." There's a moment, right before a thunderstorm hits, when the air gets thick and the birds stop chirping. That was the vibe at the table. It was coming. They just didn't know it yet. And here's the twist, no one was going to hear it from me. Because the person who'd blow it all wide open, who'd read the headline aloud like a preacher reading from the book of Revelation, wasn't me. It was Dad. And when he did, the only thing louder than the silence afterward was the look on Michelle's face. Michelle always had a way of holding court, like every living room was her stage and every dinner table was another opportunity to subtly remind everyone why she was, in her own words, the one who turned out all right. She had already breezed through a story about her latest management training seminar in Scottsdale, made 3 separate references to her boss by first name like they were brunch buddies, and slipped in the phrase six-figure bonus structure, like she was trying to drop breadcrumbs for admiration. And sure enough, the nods came, one by one, from Mom, from Aunt June, even from Uncle Gary, who didn't understand a damn thing about corporate life, but always respected a woman who handled her business. Meanwhile, I kept chewing my green bean casserole in silence, sipping a little too much red wine, trying not to laugh at how easily everyone swallowed Michelle's well-rehearsed tales like communion wafers. The kicker was when she started talking about how she'd single-handedly revamped the onboarding process at her company, reduced turnover by 11% in 2 quarters, she claimed. Though something about the way Rob blinked slowly and stared into his bourbon glass made me think he'd heard this particular story one too many times. Or maybe he was just trying not to roll his eyes for once. So Michelle said, turning to me again like it was a performance and I was the audience plant, "Do you still work from your couch? Or have you upgraded to a co-working space with bean bags and kombucha taps?" The table laughed again. Not loud, but enough to land. Dad even cracked a smile, which stung worse than the jab itself. This was the part that always got me, not the joke, but the endorsement. Dad, who once called me his little problem solver, now seemed to treat me like the relative who shows up at family reunions just to remind everyone that not all genes carry the same potential. Mom tried to soften it by asking if I'd brought one of my new gadgets for Jamie to see, but that just made it worse. What I built wasn't a gadget. It wasn't a hobby or a quirk. It was a company. A damn valuable one. But they didn't know that yet. Not really. 7 years ago, I quit my job at a logistics consulting firm with the arrogant hope that I could make something better, something faster, something that didn't require a dozen spreadsheets and a prayer to get deliveries to customers on time. Back then, people laughed behind my back, some to my face, when I said I was building a system to outsmart shipping inefficiencies. Michelle told me to maybe start with a small business plan before trying to reinvent the wheel. She always had a way of complimenting you with a blade behind her back. I lived broke for years, slept on friends' couches, skipped birthdays and weddings, lost one co-founder, and almost lost the second to burnout. Wes stayed because he believed in it, because we both saw the cracks in the system and knew we could fill them. What we didn't expect was how fast everything would change once we signed the pilot contract with PacPro, the warehouse chain that basically ran fulfillment for half the e-commerce startups in the Northeast. That deal had triggered the dominoes. The acquisition we just finalized this morning was the last tile falling, and it landed straight into Michelle's carefully constructed empire. But none of that mattered yet. Because at this table, I was still the guy who tinkered with apps and liked startups, the same way a kid likes bugs or baseball cards. Every once in a while, someone would ask me how it was going, but the tone was always the same, like asking a bartender if they'd written their screenplay yet. Polite curiosity, no faith behind it. Dad leaned back and tapped his phone screen, squinting through his glasses. "Saw something about logistics in the Wall Street Journal this morning," he said, vaguely. "Can't remember the company's name. Might have been that door something or whatever." "DoorDash," I corrected. "Yeah, that's what you do, right?" he asked. I shrugged. "Sort of. It's different." Michelle chuckled. "Well, as long as you're happy, that's what matters." And then, to Rob, we all find our little corners of the world. There it was again, little. The word they used to put a leash on your success so it wouldn't bite too hard. The same word they used when I raised my first seed round, his little investment, when I signed my first contract, his little client. They never said it to Michelle. Her achievements were always major, huge, impactful. And still, I waited. I looked down at my phone again. Another ping from Wes. It's blowing up. CNBC just ran it too. You gonna say anything? I typed back, not yet. Let's see who notices first. Because what I really wanted, what I had waited 7 years for, wasn't applause. It wasn't the headlines. It was the look on Michelle's face when she realized she wasn't the one holding all the cards anymore. And right then, as Mom passed around the gravy boat and Michelle launched into a story about how she trained the new senior manager who couldn't even spell escalation matrix, Dad's phone buzzed again. He frowned, picked it up, and tapped the screen a few times. I saw it before he said anything. His eyebrows lifted, and then he let out a low, surprised exhale. He was reading it. The headline. The news. My news. There was a pause. The kind you feel in your gut before a storm hits. Then Dad cleared his throat and said, Says here, a company called Aloud Optics just acquired Targetcom. He blinked. That's your company, right, Eli? Michelle stopped mid-sentence. The table froze. Even Jamie looked up from his phone. I didn't say a word. I didn't have to. Because the silence that followed was everything I'd ever waited for. People think success comes with fireworks, with confetti and champagne and the kind of crowd that hoists you up on their shoulders like you just won the damn Super Bowl. But in reality, it creeps in quietly like a slow tide rising beneath your feet, no trumpets. Just a subtle shift in pressure before the flood. The moment Dad said the words out loud, Aloud Optics just acquired Targetcom, the oxygen seemed to drain out of the room like someone had cracked a window in a pressurized cabin, and for once in her life, Michelle didn't have a single word to say. She just sat there blinking, mouth slightly open, her fork halfway to her lips with a sad little piece of green bean casserole trembling at the edge. And you want to know something sick? I didn't feel joy. Not right away. I felt a strange, paralyzing stillness, like my brain was trying to reboot itself under the weight of everything it had ever wanted finally arriving in one brutal, poetic sentence. Dad looked up at me over the rim of his reading glasses, as if he was still trying to do the math in his head. Still piecing together how the kid who once got suspended for hacking the school Wi-Fi had just purchased the company his daughter had spent the last 8 years worshipping like a damn cathedral. This is your company, Eli? He asked again, slower this time, as if maybe the story would change if he repeated it. Yeah, I said, voice flat, almost gentle. It is. Michelle's eyes narrowed as if the words themselves couldn't possibly be true, as if the entire internet had somehow colluded with me to play an elaborate Thanksgiving prank just to humiliate her, and honestly, it wasn't the worst theory. That's not possible, she said, barely above a whisper. We would have heard about it in the quarterly update. There's no way. I resisted the urge to laugh because, of course, they wouldn't have told her. She was middle management at best, padded with just enough stock options and office prestige to feel important, but kept just far enough outside the executive circle to be disposable. They'd known for weeks. Her department had been flagged in the org chart review and marked for reorganization the minute the ink dried on the term sheet. If she hadn't been so busy decorating her office with motivational quotes and overachieving in meaningless metrics, maybe she would have seen it coming. I glanced back at Dad, whose face was now frozen in a strange, uncomfortable blend of pride, confusion, and maybe a touch of regret. He set his phone down slowly, like it had just bitten him, and folded his hands on the table. Well, he said, clearing his throat. That's something. Rob, ever the opportunist, leaned forward like a weasel sniffing for his next safe bet. So this is real? Like, you actually, bought the company outright? It's a full acquisition, I said. Assets, teams, leadership, the whole stack. Michelle's voice cracked slightly. But how? When did you? How much did? It's been in the works for about 5 months, I said, still not raising my voice, still keeping my tone measured, like I wasn't trying to drive the knife in deeper even though every cell in my body was screaming for it. We kept it quiet for obvious reasons. Conflict of interest, NDAs, that kind of thing. Jamie let out a low whistle, like he was watching a particularly good episode of some prestige drama, and muttered, "Holy crap," under his breath. Mom, who hadn't said much in the last few minutes, now looked at me like I'd grown an extra head, half awe, half worry, because, to her, success was always a double-edged sword. She was the kind of woman who thought big wins came with big crashes, and I knew in that moment she was already picturing me losing it all and crawling back in shame. But I wasn't crawling. I was sitting tall for the first time in years, no longer bent by the weight of their expectations, no longer playing the family mascot. I looked around the table and saw it, this shifting landscape, the unspoken reordering of power, like tectonic plates grinding beneath the surface of a dinner gone nuclear. The room was quiet except for the occasional clink of a glass or the soft rustle of someone adjusting in their seat, because no one knew what to say now. The hierarchy had collapsed, and no one had a script for this version of reality. Michelle finally found her voice, and it came out like a cracked whip. "So what, you came here just to gloat? To drop this bomb on Thanksgiving like some kind of power play?" I raised my eyebrows. "No," I said honestly. "I came for the turkey. This part's just a bonus." Her face flushed red, and I saw the hurt under the rage. That's the thing no one tells you about vindication. It doesn't taste the way you think it will. It's not sweet. It's not some joyful explosion of relief. It's heavy. It's complicated. It's the moment you realize that proving someone wrong doesn't always make you feel right. She stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the hardwood floor with a shriek, and for a second I thought she was going to throw her wine glass, but instead she grabbed her plate, dumped the contents into the trash, and disappeared into the hallway with Rob trailing behind her like a stunned, underpaid bodyguard. No one tried to stop her. No one knew how. Dad rubbed his temples and finally looked up at me with an expression I'd only ever seen once before, the day he found out I got arrested at 16 for stealing parts from the auto shop and trying to build a homemade drone. "I don't know what to say," he admitted. "You don't have to say anything," I replied. "Just, maybe next time, don't laugh when someone says they're building something." Jamie smiled and raised his glass. "To building something," he said, and it was quiet, but it echoed. That night, after everyone had picked a dessert and stumbled through forced conversations, I stepped outside into the cold air and checked my phone. Wes had sent another message. "We're getting calls already. Another offer's coming. Bigger. You ready to talk Monday?" I stared at the screen and felt something shift again. The game was still going. And somewhere in that house, behind a closed door, Michelle was probably screaming into a pillow while her perfect little world cracked at the seams. And part of me, God help me, wasn't sure if I felt sorry for her or not. The strange thing about power is that when you finally hold it in your hands, when the weight of it settles across your shoulders like some invisible crown, it doesn't feel the way you expect. It doesn't come with a round of applause or even a nod of respect from the people who once doubted you. Sometimes, it comes as a long silence after a single sentence spoken by your 71-year-old father, who still uses 2 fingers to type and thinks Bluetooth is a brand of toothpaste. That silence stretched across the dining room like a taut wire, humming with tension and confusion and something else that none of us wanted to name yet, shame, maybe, or fear, or worse. A dawning realization that the story we'd all been telling about who mattered and who didn't had just been rewritten in real time, without anyone's permission. Dad held the phone at arm's length, adjusting his glasses like the screen might lie to him if he stared too closely. "Says here, Route Optics acquires Targetcom in all-stock deal," he read aloud, his voice slow and cautious, like the words might explode if spoken too fast. "Leadership structure to be reorganized. Current executive roles under review. Transaction closed this morning." Son of a gun. His eyes flicked up to me, and for once they didn't hold judgment or skepticism or any of the usual paternal filters. They held awe. Quiet, stunned awe, as if he was looking at me for the first time, not as the screw-up, not as the dreamer, not as the kid who couldn't stick to a real job, but as something else entirely, something bigger. Michelle, standing at the doorway with her arms crossed and her jaw tight, looked like she'd been punched in the gut and was trying very, very hard not to let anyone see the bruise. Her lips moved once, twice, but no sound came out, and when she finally found her voice, it came out brittle and breathless. "That's not possible," she said, blinking like someone waking up mid-nightmare. "That has to be a mistake. This is some kind of tech blog bullshit, clickbait crap, right?" "It's Bloomberg, honey," Rob said quietly, still seated, his eyes on me now with a flicker of something like respect or maybe calculation. "And TechCrunch. It's everywhere." I wanted to say something kind, maybe even something reassuring, because even though she'd spent years walking all over me in heels that probably cost more than my first car, she was still my sister, and deep down I think I still wanted her to see me, not as a rival, not as a threat, but as someone worth her damn time. But whatever sympathy I had was buried under 7 years of snide remarks, backhanded compliments, and public belittling disguised as sisterly concern. So I just sat there, letting the silence do what my words never could, force them all to reconsider the version of me they'd carried in their heads for so long. Jamie finally broke the silence, laughing under his breath in that half-incredulous, half-impressed way that only a 24-year-old with zero emotional baggage could manage. "Dude," he said, "you're like Thanos. You just snapped and took her job." The table erupted in nervous laughter, tentative, scattered, but laughter all the same. Mom shot him a look that said, "Not now," but he shrugged and kept sipping his wine like it was just another Thursday. Michelle stared at me, eyes sharp with fury and disbelief, and when she spoke again, her voice was louder now, brittle but defiant. "You planned this," she said, jabbing a finger in my direction. "You sat there all smug, letting me talk, letting me look like a fool in front of everyone, and you knew the whole time. You wanted to humiliate me." "No," I said quietly but firmly. "I didn't want to humiliate you. I just didn't want to have to shrink anymore so you could feel tall." The words hung there between us like smoke from a house fire, impossible to breathe, impossible to ignore. "You're disgusting," she snapped, stepping back like I'd slapped her. "You think this makes you better than me? You think this hostile takeover, makes up for every time you failed?" I stood up, finally, because staying seated felt too small for what was happening. "I don't think I'm better than you, Michelle. I just finally know I'm not worse." Rob looked like he wanted to disappear into the floorboards. Mom was visibly trembling, her hand on Dad's arm like she could anchor herself in the storm, and Dad just sat there, staring at me like he was still trying to reconcile the son he thought he had with the man standing in front of him. "You did all this, on your own?" he asked, and there was no malice in it this time, no doubt. Just quiet, cautious admiration. "Not alone," I said. "Wes and I built it together. We've got a team of 23 now. Some of them were still in high school when I started. Some of them had given up on corporate jobs because of companies like Michelle's. We built something better. Something leaner, faster, fairer. And now it's ours." Michelle looked like she might cry, and for a second I almost reached out to her, but she turned and walked away, the heels clicking on the tile like gunshots, each step louder than the last. Rob hesitated, then followed her, murmuring something none of us caught. The room felt smaller after that. Tighter. Like we were all still stuck in the past, even as the future had kicked in the front door and made itself comfortable. Dad poured another drink, then raised his glass slightly toward me, not quite a toast, not quite an apology. "Guess I was wrong about that little side hustle," he said. I nodded. "Yeah. A lot of people were." And just like that, the balance shifted. The rules changed. But not everyone was ready to live in this new version of the story. And not everyone would make it out intact. The hallway was filled with the kind of tension that wraps around your chest and refuses to let go, like the breath you don't realize you've been holding until it starts to burn. Michelle had vanished down the stairs, her footsteps echoing like accusations, and Rob followed behind her without a word, his face unreadable in that way finance guys master early equal parts regret and calculation. The door slammed in the distance, hard enough to rattle the framed family photos lining the hallway, those perfect little snapshots of holidays past, all forced smiles and matching sweaters, and lies so subtle you'd swear they were truth if you didn't know better. I stood in the entryway, watching the front door like it might open again and rewind the last 15 minutes, like maybe we could all just go back to the part where Michelle made her little dig, and I played along like I always had, the harmless failure. The lovable loser, the cautionary tale they brought out for moral contrast. But no one was coming back through that door. Not this time. The line had been crossed, and the blood on the floor was real family blood, pride blood, the kind that stains for years. Behind me, the kitchen had fallen into an uneasy quiet. Aunt June pretended to rearrange the dinner rolls, her hands moving with the robotic efficiency of someone desperate to look useful, while Uncle Gary kept sipping his whiskey like he was trying to drink himself into invisibility. Jamie stood by the fridge, thumbs twitching over his phone, eyes darting up every few seconds to study the fallout like it was a car crash he couldn't look away from. Mom was fussing with the dessert trays, cutting perfectly even slices of pumpkin pie that no one was going to eat, while Dad stayed seated at the head of the table, one hand resting on his bourbon glass, the other pressed against his forehead like he was trying to massage the confusion out of his brain. I walked back into the dining room, pulled my chair out slowly, and sat down without a word. No one spoke. The food had gone cold. The cranberry sauce had started to congeal in the bowl. It felt like the meal had ended and something else entirely had begun, something raw and jagged and unfinished. Dad finally broke the silence. "You know," he said, voice low and dry, "when you were 16 and you rigged the lawnmower engine to run off that solar panel, I thought maybe you were just trying to get out of chores. Now I'm starting to think you were playing a different game entirely." I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. "I was just trying to make something work," I said. "Nobody wanted to help, so I figured it out myself." He nodded slowly, the lines in his face deeper than I remembered. "That's how I did it," he said, more to himself than to me. "Back when I opened the shop, nobody believed in it either. Your mother's brother said I was throwing money into a fire. Worked 7 days a week to keep that place open." I looked at him for a long moment. "Yeah, and you always said it wasn't enough. That I should have followed Michelle's path. Got the degree, climbed the ladder, stayed safe." His eyes met mine, and for once they didn't look disappointed. "Just tired." "I was scared," he said. "You were always chasing the edge of the cliff, and I didn't want to watch you fall." I nodded. "I fell. A lot." "And you got up," he said. The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable. It was heavy, yes, but it was the kind of weight that comes with understanding, the kind that makes you sit a little straighter, listen a little harder, breathe a little deeper. It felt, in a way, like maybe we'd finally arrived at the version of each other that had always been hiding behind the noise. Then Jamie, still holding his phone, looked up and said something that flipped the temperature of the room once again. "Hey, not sure if I should say this, but Michelle's been faking her numbers at work." The sentence landed like a dropped brick. "What the hell are you talking about?" Dad said, sitting up straight. Jamie shrugged, uneasy now, eyes darting between me and Dad. "I'm just saying what I know. One of my roommates used to intern at TargetCom. She said Michelle's department cooked their quarterly reports to keep bonuses high. Changed attrition numbers. Claimed credit for programs they didn't launch. Like, serious HR-level bullshit." I stared at him, trying to process. "Are you sure?" "She showed me emails," Jamie said. "From someone inside. They had a whole Slack channel mocking her for it. Called her Spin Dr. Barbie." I didn't want to say anything, but this whole thing, man. Maybe she's not just mad because you bought her company. Maybe she's scared. The realization settled like dust. Of course. Of course she was. This wasn't just about family politics anymore. This was about survival. About a reputation teetering on a ledge, about the panic that sets in when the floor shifts and you realize the secrets you buried might finally claw their way to the surface. I leaned back, staring at the flickering candles in the centerpiece. Michelle hadn't just been caught off guard. She'd been cornered. And knowing her, knowing how tightly she held onto appearances, how obsessively she controlled the narrative of her life, this acquisition wasn't just a career blow, it was an existential threat. A crack in the mirror she'd spent her whole life polishing. Mom stepped forward then, quiet and pale, and placed a plate of untouched pie in front of me. "I think," she said softly, "we should all stop pretending this is about business." No one replied. Because she was right. It never had been. This was about old wounds dressed up in new suits. About decades of silence and swallowed anger and holidays where we all played pretend just long enough to get through dessert. This was about me, finally standing tall. About Michelle, finally falling. And about all the broken ground between us. The worst part? I didn't know how to fix it. And I wasn't sure I even wanted to try. The front porch was cold, the kind of cold that seeped through your shirt and straight into your bones, but I stayed out there anyway, leaning against the railing while the wind whistled through the brittle trees and the neighborhood settled into that post-holiday hush. The one where everyone was either too drunk, too full, or too emotionally wrung out to keep talking. From inside the house, I could hear muffled voices, a few clinks of dishes, someone trying to pretend things were normal again, but it wasn't normal, and we all knew it. The kind of thing that just happened in there doesn't go away with coffee and pie and small talk about football. I stared at my phone without really seeing it, my thumb hovering over Wes's last message, another offer already, bigger than the first, from a logistics giant who'd been circling us like a hawk for months. But I couldn't bring myself to open it yet. It felt like crossing a second finish line before I'd had time to breathe past the first. In the silence of the evening, with Thanksgiving smoke still clinging to my jacket and the ghost of Michelle's voice still echoing in my head, all I could think was how strange it felt to win. The door creaked open behind me, and I didn't need to turn to know it was her. Michelle stepped out onto the porch slowly, quietly, like someone approaching a wild animal, unsure if I'd bolt or bite. She had changed out of her heels into a pair of old slippers that used to live at Mom's place, and she clutched a glass of wine with both hands like it was the only thing keeping her together. For a long time, she didn't say anything, just stood beside me, staring out at the street. When she finally spoke, her voice was quieter than I expected, brittle but not broken. "I always thought you'd flame out," she said. "Not because I wanted you to, but because that's what everyone kept saying. You weren't playing it safe. You weren't doing the right things. I figured eventually you'd crash." I didn't look at her. I did crash. More times than I can count. "But you got up," she said, a little bitterly. "And then you bought my company." Jesus. There was no sarcasm in it. No smugness. Just that strange, exhausted disbelief that comes from having the rug yanked out from under you by the one person you swore would always be underneath you. We stood in silence for a while longer, the wind picking up, the night creeping colder. I wanted to ask her why she cared so much about appearances, why she spent years crafting a life that looked perfect from the outside, but was apparently built on fabricated numbers and office politics. But I didn't. Instead, I asked the one thing I didn't expect to ask. "Are you okay?" Michelle laughed, short and hollow. "No, not really. I've spent the last 8 years convincing myself that if I just climbed high enough, earned enough, impressed the right people, it would feel good. That I'd finally feel safe. But I don't. Not even a little. And now I might lose everything." I turned toward her. "Why do you fake the numbers?" She winced, closing her eyes for a second. "Because they wouldn't listen to me. Because no matter what I did, someone else always got the credit. because I was so goddamn tired of being told I was lucky to be in the room. So I spun things. Just enough to look better. And it worked. Until now. There was nothing I could say that would make her feel better, and frankly, I didn't want to. She'd built a castle on sand and mocked me for laying bricks, and now the tide had come in. But she was still my sister, and I wasn't cruel, not really. I haven't decided what to do with your department yet, I said, slowly. There's going to be a full audit. Compliance, too. But if you're honest about what happened, if you're willing to own it, you'd keep me, she interrupted, eyes wide. I'd consider it, I said. But not because you're family, because you still might be useful. That's it. She nodded slowly, swallowing hard. That's more than I deserve. You're probably right. More silence followed, this time softer. Not the kind that wrapped around your throat, but the kind that let your shoulders drop an inch. We both stared out at the street again, at the blinking porch lights, the plastic turkeys still wobbling in a neighbor's yard. Childhood felt a million miles away. You know what I hated most about you? She asked suddenly. I raised an eyebrow. Just one thing. She ignored the jab. You always got back up. No matter how hard life hit you, you just kept going. And somehow, that pissed me off more than anything. Like you didn't know you were supposed to stay down. I didn't, I said simply. Because staying down meant you won. That got a small laugh out of her, one that faded fast. You win now. What are you going to do with it? I didn't have an answer. Not yet. All I knew was that revenge didn't feel like I thought it would. It wasn't loud. It wasn't satisfying. It was cold and complicated and kind of lonely. Michelle turned to head back inside, but before she went through the door, she paused and looked over her shoulder. Thanks for not humiliating me in front of everyone, she said. You could have. I shrugged. Didn't need to. The truth did it for me. When she was gone, I stayed out there a little longer, watching the breath curl from my mouth, feeling the weight of everything we didn't say still hanging between us. The winner doesn't always feel like one. Sometimes he just feels tired. And maybe, just maybe, a little more human than he wants to be. By the time I came back inside, the dishes had been mostly cleared and the lights dimmed just enough to pretend the night was winding down, even though I could feel the raw tension still hanging like grease in the air. Nobody talked about what had happened, not directly. Instead, they picked up conversations in midair, half-hearted and hollow, about weather and sports and which neighbor got the best Black Friday deal on a flat screen. But every glance, every too long silence, every fork scraped against a plate told the real story. Something permanent had cracked inside this family tonight, and no one knew how to put it back together. I found myself standing in the kitchen with a cup of black coffee gone lukewarm, staring out the window like I expected some kind of sign, like the sky might open up and tell me what the hell I was supposed to do next. I'd just pulled off the biggest win of my life, and yet here I was, drinking sad coffee under flickering light bulbs, feeling less like a titan of industry and more like the janitor who stuck around after everyone else had bailed. Wes had sent another message, short, direct, probably typed while pacing. Offer from Apex Logi just hit 7 figures. Want me to call you tonight? I didn't reply right away. I just stared at the message, the words as heavy as bricks. 7 figures. 7 goddamn figures. For years we couldn't even afford decent health insurance, and now we had offers stacked like poker chips. It should have felt like a victory lap. Instead, it felt like I was running in place with concrete in my chest. Then Dad walked in, slower than usual, hands shoved deep into his pockets. He looked like he'd aged another 10 years in the past 2 hours, like everything he thought he understood about his children had been picked up and shaken until only the broken pieces remained. I never thought I'd see the day, he said, settling into the chair by the kitchen table. You buying a company. Your sister's company. Hell. I set the coffee down and leaned against the counter. You mad? He shook his head. I'm not sure what I am. Surprised, mostly. Proud, I think. Maybe a little embarrassed. Embarrassed? I spent most of your life thinking you were gonna flame out. That all that tinkering and skipping steps was gonna bite you in the ass. I told your mom more than once you'd come crawling back with nothing but debt and a busted laptop. I didn't expect this. Neither did Michelle. No, he said, sighing. But she needed it. I raised an eyebrow. You think she needed to be taken down? I think she needed to learn there's always someone smarter, someone hungrier, someone willing to risk more than she is. She's been coasting a long time, hiding behind buzzwords and fancy job titles. You handed her a mirror tonight, Eli. Not many people have the guts to do that to their own blood. Felt more like handing her a grenade, I muttered. Dad chuckled, just a soft, gravelly sound. Well, sometimes the truth explodes. I thought maybe that was it. Maybe we'd sit there and ride out the awkwardness until bedtime saved us both. But then he looked up and said something I never expected to hear from him. You gonna keep her on? I don't know yet. You should. Why? Because she's still your sister. And because firing her would be easy. Too easy. You didn't build your company on easy, did you? I shook my head. No. Nothing about it was easy. Then don't start now. I didn't answer. Not right away. I knew he was right, in some old-school way that didn't sit comfortably in the chest, but still rang true. Firing Michelle might feel like the final blow, the last act of revenge, but keeping her, making her answer for what she'd done, forcing her to rebuild something real under my roof, that might be the better punishment. Or maybe it was a second chance. I wasn't sure yet. We didn't say much after that. He finished his drink. I finished my coffee. Then he gave me a firm pat on the shoulder and went to bed like nothing had happened, like everything hadn't changed. The next morning came faster than I wanted. The sun bled through the blinds and made everything feel too bright, too real. People had started leaving, filtering out with casseroles wrapped in foil and awkward hugs exchanged at the door. Michelle hadn't said goodbye. She'd packed up early and left before dawn, according to Mom, who handed me a Tupperware container like it could somehow make up for the emotional damage. As I walked to my car, phone buzzing again in my pocket, I saw Rob standing by the side of the driveway, talking low into his phone with that tone I'd heard 100 times from venture guys, half smile, all hustle. He didn't see me at first, which gave me just enough time to catch the words that shifted the earth under my feet one more time. Yeah, she's out. The whole division's screwed. If we file first, we can claim mismanagement and walk with clean hands. Let the new owners take the heat. My jaw clenched before my brain had even caught up. He was talking about Michelle. About suing. About burning down the company I had just poured half my soul into acquiring before I'd even unpacked the damn paperwork. I stepped forward, just enough to make my presence known. Interesting call, Rob. You always plan your betrayals on Thanksgiving weekend, or is this a special occasion? He jumped like a guilty teenager, fumbling his phone back into his coat pocket. It's not what it sounded like. Oh, I think it was exactly what it sounded like. You don't understand the situation. No, I said, stepping closer, my voice low but ice cold. You don't understand who's in charge now. We stood there, the early sun casting long shadows over the driveway, two men with matching egos and entirely different stakes. He thought he could maneuver his way through this, twist the narrative like he always had, but I'd played that game too long to be surprised anymore. If you so much as file a single complaint, I said, I'll make sure your name comes up in every investigation. Michelle might be on thin ice, but you're already halfway through. He didn't respond. Just nodded once and turned away. Back in the car, I sat with the engine off and stared at my reflection in the rearview mirror. I didn't look victorious. I looked like someone who just realized the fight never really ends. It just changes arenas. And somewhere, in the back of my mind, a question whispered louder than any headline. Was this still about building something? Or had I just become another corporate executioner in a slightly better suit? There's a peculiar kind of silence that follows chaos, not the peaceful sort that settles over a quiet morning or a finished meal, but the kind that lingers in the aftermath of emotional shrapnel, a a silence heavy with everything unsaid and unresolved, as if the air itself is waiting to see who flinches first. That was the silence I sat in that night, back in my apartment with the city buzzing faintly outside the window, my jacket still reeking faintly of turkey, bourbon, and whatever shame couldn't be washed off with a hot shower and a stiff drink. The Thanksgiving that was supposed to be just another round of awkward questions and overcooked traditions had mutated into something far sharper, deeper, and undeniably final. I hadn't spoken to Michelle since she left before sunrise, hadn't responded to Rob's 3 follow-up emails trying to clarify the earlier misunderstanding, and hadn't answered Wes's texts about next steps or Apex Logi's revised offer, which now apparently included a seat on their board and a multi-year non-compete clause that made my stomach tighten. I hadn't done anything, really, except sit in my chair, replaying every word, every silence, every flicker of expression across my father's face as he read that headline out loud in front of everyone. The acquisition had happened. My company, my vision, had grown into something powerful enough to absorb an empire, and yet the only thing I could feel was the unsettling sense that I was still losing something. There was no celebration, no champagne, no post-victory glow, just this quiet ache where I thought satisfaction would be. Like I'd climbed a mountain only to realize the peak was just another ledge, and the air didn't get any easier to breathe. The call came just after midnight, when most people with families were tucked into bed or quietly arguing over leftovers. I stared at the screen for a moment. Michelle. I almost didn't answer. Part of me wanted to let it ring, to deny her the satisfaction of explaining, just like she had denied me years of dignity under her carefully disguised condescension. But something in me, it wasn't forgiveness, not exactly, picked up the call and held the phone to my ear without saying a word. Her voice was raw, low, missing that sharp edge she wore like perfume. "I'm sorry," she said, and for a second I thought I misheard her. "I'm not calling to beg," she added quickly, "or to twist anything. I didn't want the last thing you heard from me to be anger." "You were scared," I said flatly. "Yeah," she breathed. "I still am." There was a long pause, the kind where 1,000 possible responses gather at the back of your throat, all of them feeling both inadequate and too much. She continued before I could find mine. "I screwed up, Eli. More than just the numbers. I screwed up being your sister. I made you feel small so I could feel big. And now the floor's gone out under me, and I don't know how to stand." "I don't want to be your enemy," I said quietly, not even sure who I was trying to convince. "I know," she said. "And that makes this worse. Because you had every right to gloat, to throw it in my face, to do what I've done to you 100 times. But you didn't. You just let the truth speak." More silence. A different kind. One that didn't burn so much as bruise. "I'll accept whatever comes," she said. "If you cut me, I'll understand. If you keep me, I'll do the work. Real work. No lies. No polish. Just something honest." "I haven't decided yet," I told her. "But I'm not rushing into anything. This isn't a game." "I know," she whispered. "That's why I'm scared." After we hung up, I stared at the ceiling for a long time, the phone still warm in my hand. The outlines of my life had changed so drastically in a single day that I didn't recognize the man in the mirror anymore. Not the boy who'd been mocked at the table. Not the founder who'd built a company from ramen and grit. Not the brother who'd finally earned his reckoning. I wasn't sure who I was now. And maybe that was the scariest part. The next morning, I opened the email from Apex Logi, read the terms, reread them, then closed it without responding. Not because I didn't want the money or the prestige or the ridiculous corner office, but because I hadn't figured out whether saying yes would be moving forward or selling out. Somewhere along the line, I had started this thing because I believed there had to be a better way, not just for logistics or business, but for me. For all of us. And now that the world finally agreed I'd built something worth owning, I had to ask myself if I still believed it was something worth keeping. I stood by the window, watching the street below come back to life, The same sidewalks I used to walk after all-night coding marathons. The same lights that blurred through rainy nights when I wondered if I was just another idiot chasing a dream that didn't want me back. The city didn't care who I was. It never had. But I did. Or at least, I used to. My phone buzzed again. This time it wasn't Wes or Michelle or Rob. It was a new number, unknown, with a brief message. We're interested in talking. You've built something rare. Let's discuss what comes next. I stared at it, that phrase, what comes next, echoing louder than any applause ever could. And that's when it hit me. The real victory wasn't the deal, or the silence, or even the look on Michelle's face. It was this moment. This quiet, uncertain, untidy moment where I got to choose what mattered now. I didn't delete the message. I didn't reply either. I just stood there, in the middle of everything and nothing, wondering if maybe the next mountain wasn't about proving anyone wrong anymore. Maybe it was about figuring out who I still wanted to be now that I'd finally won. Or if I'd lost something else along the way that I hadn't even noticed was gone. And that's the part no one ever tells you about success. Sometimes, the echo of it feels more empty than the silence that came before.